Most people aren't failing. They're just watching other people win, scrolling, comparing, staying updated. They tell themselves they're learning. They tell themselves this will help them stay motivated. But slowly, something else happens. Their attention gets scattered, their energy leaks out, and without realizing it, they stop building anything meaningful of their own. What makes this dangerous is that it feels normal. Everyone is watching everyone. Everyone knows what everyone else is doing. And because it's common, it doesn't feel like a problem, but it is. Focus doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly, one distraction at a time, one comparison at a time. And the more noise you consume, the harder it becomes to hear your own direction. You don't lose because you're incapable. You lose because your attention is split in too many directions. This audiobook isn't here to hype you up. It's not here to motivate you for a moment. And it's not here to tell you to hustle harder. It's here to help you understand something far more important. Why focusing on yourself feels harder than ever. What's quietly stealing your attention every day. And how the people who actually win learn to go quiet, stay focused, and build without constantly looking around. Winning rarely looks loud while it's happening. Most progress happens in silence, away from validation, away from opinions. And that's uncomfortable for most people, because when you stop watching others, you're left alone with your own effort, your own discipline, your own responsibility. But that's also where things finally start to change. This audiobook is about cutting the noise, about choosing focus over distraction, and about staying committed to your own path, long enough for results to speak for you. Not tomorrow, not someday, but steadily, quietly, until you win. Chapter 1. The Comparison Trap. Comparison rarely feels dangerous at the beginning. It feels practical. You look at what others are doing because you want direction. You want reassurance that you're on the right path. You want to know if you're falling behind. That impulse is human. But what starts as awareness slowly turns into dependence. You stop checking others occasionally. You start checking them constantly. Before you begin your work, you look outward. Before you end your day, you look outward again. And without noticing the shift, your internal compass weakens. The problem isn't that you see other people winning. The problem is what your mind does with that information. Your brain doesn't understand context. It doesn't see timelines, sacrifices, or hidden effort. It only sees outcomes. And outcomes are deceptive. They arrive long after the work is done, but they appear all at once. So, when you compare your effort to someone else's result, your brain draws the wrong conclusion. It assumes you're slow. It assumes you're behind. It assumes something is wrong with you. None of that is true, but your nervous system reacts as if it is. This is where momentum starts to break, not because you lose ability, but because you lose trust. Trust in your pace, trust in your process, trust in quiet repetition. Comparison turns patience into pressure. You start rushing things that require time. You abandon systems before they have a chance to work. You jump strategies, routines, goals, not because they're ineffective, but because someone else looks further ahead. This creates a constant low-level anxiety. You're working, but never settled, moving, but never grounded, and focus can't survive in that state. Focus requires safety. It requires the sense that where you are is acceptable, even if where you're going isn't visible yet. Comparison destroys that safety. Here's something most people don't realize. When you repeatedly watch others succeed, your brain receives stimulation without effort. It feels rewarding, even though you did nothing to earn it. Over time, this trains your mind to seek progress vicariously instead of producing it directly. You feel busy, you feel engaged, but you aren't building anything real. This is why comparison is so addictive. It gives the illusion of participation without the discomfort of execution. And that illusion quietly weakens discipline, because real work feels heavier when your brain has been fed lighter rewards. At some point, comparison stops being inspiring and starts being discouraging. Not because you lack potential, but because you've been measuring yourself against results instead of effort. That's the distortion. Results are public, effort is private, and when you keep staring at public results, private effort begins to feel insignificant. Focused people understand something crucial. They don't avoid comparison because they're confident. They avoid it because they're strategic. They know attention is finite. They know energy leaks through exposure. And they know that every unnecessary input adds friction to execution, so they limit what they see. Not out of insecurity, out of precision. They choose to measure themselves against one thing only: their own consistency. That's the shift. When you stop tracking how fast others are moving, you regain respect for slow progress. You stop asking, "Why am I not there yet?" and start asking, "Did I show up today?" That question is grounding, and grounding restores focus. Here is the principle that quietly separates builders from spectators. If it doesn't directly support what you're building, it doesn't deserve regular access to your attention. Not everything that motivates you is useful. Not everything that looks productive is progress. Once you see this clearly, comparison loses its grip because you're no longer trying to win someone else's race. You're committed to finishing your own, and to do that consistently, you need to understand the real enemy of focus, not comparison itself, but the environment that constantly pulls your attention away. That's what we need to look at next. Chapter 2. Why focus feels so hard. Today, focus didn't become difficult overnight. It was slowly trained out of you. Not because you're weak, not because you lack discipline, but because your environment changed faster than your mind could adapt. You're living in a system that constantly pulls your attention away. Notifications, updates, messages, endless information. None of it feels dangerous on its own, but together, it creates a state where your mind is always reacting and rarely directing. Your brain was never designed for this much input. It evolved to focus on one problem at a time, one task, one threat, one goal. But modern life keeps your attention fragmented. Before you can settle into a task, something interrupts. Before your thoughts deepen, something demands a response. Over time, your brain adapts to this pattern. It stops expecting depth. It starts expecting novelty. This is the part most people misunderstand. They think focus is a personality trait, something you either have or don't. It isn't. Focus is a skill, and like any skill, it weakens when it's not used. When your day is filled with constant switching, your mind becomes uncomfortable with stillness. Silence feels boring, one task feels heavy, and sustained effort feels unnatural. That discomfort isn't a flaw, it's withdrawal. Your brain has been conditioned to expect stimulation, so when it doesn't get it, it resists. This is why sitting down to do meaningful work often feels harder than scrolling endlessly. Scrolling rewards you immediately. Work rewards you later. And your brain, left untrained, will always lean toward what feels easier now. There's another layer to this problem. Constant input creates the illusion of urgency. Everything feels important. Everything feels time-sensitive. Everything feels like it needs attention right now. But when everything is urgent, nothing truly is. Your mind stays busy, but your direction stays unclear. This is where focus really breaks down. Focus requires priority. Priority requires exclusion. And modern environments are designed to make exclusion feel irresponsible. You feel like you'll miss something, fall behind, lose relevance, so you keep checking, just in case. But every time you do, you teach your brain a dangerous lesson. You teach it that interruption is normal, that deep work is optional, that reaction matters more than intention. Over time, this becomes automatic. You reach for stimulation without deciding to. Your attention shifts before you're even aware of it. And when you finally try to focus, your mind resists. Not because it can't, but because it's out of practice. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose focus because life is demanding. They lose focus because they allow too many demands to enter their mental space. Focused people don't have fewer responsibilities. They have clearer boundaries. They understand that attention is not unlimited, and if they don't decide where it goes, their environment will decide for them. So they reduce friction. They don't rely on willpower. They design their surroundings to make focus easier and distraction less accessible. This is the shift most people miss. You don't fight distraction directly, you make focus the default. When the noise is reduced, your mind doesn't need to struggle as much. Clarity returns, effort feels lighter, and consistency becomes possible again. But to do that, you first have to get comfortable with something most people avoid: quiet. Because real focus isn't built in chaos, it's built in silence. And that silence often feels lonely at first. That's what we need to understand next. Chapter 3. The power of isolation. Isolation has a bad reputation. Most people hear the word and think of loneliness, disconnection, withdrawal, but isolation isn't about being alone. It's about being undisturbed. There's a difference most people never learn to see. Loneliness is when you want connection and can't find it. Isolation is when you choose distance to protect your direction. One drains you, the other sharpens you. The reason isolation feels uncomfortable at first is because it removes external reference points. No one is clapping, no one is watching, no one is reacting. And without those signals, your mind starts asking questions. Is this worth it? Am I doing enough? Does this even matter? That discomfort isn't a warning sign. It's a transition. Most people avoid isolation not because it's harmful, but because it exposes something they've been using noise to escape: their own responsibility. When there's no audience, no feedback, no validation, the only thing left is the work. And that's where focus is either built or avoided. Here's what usually happens. People say they want to focus, but they structure their lives to stay accessible, always reachable, always responsive, always aware of what everyone else is doing. They mistake availability for importance. But availability fragments attention, and fragmented attention can't go deep. Focused people make a different choice. They reduce their visibility before they increase their output. They don't announce what they're doing. They don't explain their absence. They don't justify their silence. Not because they're hiding, but because they're working. Isolation gives you something noise never can: uninterrupted feedback. When you're alone with your effort, you start noticing patterns. What distracts you? What drains you? What actually moves the needle? Without constant input, your mind recalibrates. Thoughts slow down, decisions become clearer, and effort starts feeling intentional again. This is where most people quit, not because isolation is painful, but because it's quiet. And in that quiet, there's no escape from your own standards. You see how often you delay, how easily you negotiate, how quickly you reach for comfort. Isolation doesn't create these habits, it reveals them. That's why it's powerful, because once something is visible, it can be corrected. Another truth most people miss: isolation isn't permanent, it's seasonal. You don't isolate to disappear forever. You isolate to build something worth returning with. Winners don't avoid people, they avoid distraction. They understand that attention is shaped by proximity. What you're close to influences what you think about. What you think about influences what you act on. So they choose their distance carefully. They pull back not to disconnect from life, but to reconnect with direction. There's a quiet confidence that comes from this. When your progress isn't public, your ego stays out of the way. You're not performing, you're producing. And production compounds faster when no one is interrupting the process. Here's the principle that defines productive isolation. If something requires constant explanation, it's pulling you away from real work. Real work doesn't need defending, it needs time. Once you experience this level of focus, something changes. You stop craving updates. You stop reacting to noise. You stop measuring progress by visibility. You measure it by depth. And that depth creates results that don't need announcements. But isolation alone isn't enough. You can be alone and still unfocused. You can be quiet and still scattered. To build consistently in isolation, you need one more discipline: learning how to work without needing permission, feedback, or validation. That's where we go next. Chapter 4. Build in private. Most people don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they leak it. They leak it through explanation, through updates, through telling people what they're about to do. It feels harmless, even responsible. You share your plans, your goals, your next move, and for a moment, it feels good. That feeling is the problem. When you talk about what you're going to do, your brain reacts as if some part of the work is already done. Not logically, chemically. You get a small sense of completion without effort. And once that happens, urgency fades. This is why building in private matters. Not because privacy is mysterious, but because progress is fragile in the early stages. Before results exist, discipline needs protection. Most people expose their goals too early. They invite opinions before outcomes. They seek validation before evidence. And validation is expensive. It replaces effort with reassurance. It replaces focus with feedback. It replaces execution with explanation. You start managing reactions instead of managing your work. Focused people avoid this trap instinctively. They don't announce their direction. They commit to it. They understand something most people don't. The more people know about your plans, the more your mind shifts from doing to maintaining an image. You start acting in ways that keep you consistent with what you said, not necessarily with what needs to be done. That's subtle and dangerous. Private work removes that pressure. There's no one to impress, no one to update, no one to disappoint, just the task. And that simplicity restores energy. Another reason private building is powerful is because it keeps your ego quiet. Public goals invite comparison. Private goals invite concentration. When no one is watching, you're more honest with yourself. You adjust faster. You admit mistakes sooner. You change direction without embarrassment. That flexibility is impossible when you're performing progress for others. This doesn't mean you disappear completely. It means you're intentional about exposure. You choose silence when noise adds nothing. You choose solitude when feedback isn't useful yet. Here's the principle that protects long-term execution. Don't give unfinished work a public audience. Unfinished work needs space. It needs patience. It needs time to become solid. When you protect that space, work compounds quietly. Days start stacking, effort deepens, momentum builds, without announcement, and something else happens. You stop needing encouragement because progress becomes its own feedback. You feel it internally, you see it in your output, and that confidence is different. It's grounded. By the time results show up, there's nothing to explain. People notice without being told. They respect without being convinced. That's the real advantage of building in private. Not secrecy, but strength. However, there's a final shift that completes this process. At some point, results take over the role that motivation and validation used to play. And once that happens, everything changes. That's where we go next. Chapter 5. Let results speak. At some point, something shifts. You stop needing encouragement. You stop needing reassurance. You stop needing anyone to understand what you're doing. Not because people suddenly support you, but because results begin to remove the need for explanation. This is the phase most people never reach. They stay stuck asking for permission, for validation, for approval. But results don't ask. They arrive. And when they do, the conversation changes. Before results, people question your direction, your pace, your choices. After results, they question how you did it. That difference matters. Results create authority without noise. They establish credibility without argument. They replace opinions with evidence. This is why focused people are patient. They understand that words work temporarily, but outcomes work permanently. There's an important psychological shift that happens here. When your confidence is based on encouragement, it's unstable. It rises when people agree and falls when they don't. But when confidence is built on results, it becomes independent. You don't need agreement. You don't need recognition. You don't need validation, And knowing changes how you move. You become slower to react, more deliberate in decisions, less interested in proving anything, because results have already done that work for you. Most people try to skip this phase. They want recognition before results, respect before evidence, attention before effort. That reversal creates pressure. You start performing instead of building, defending instead of progressing, explaining instead of executing. Focused people reverse the order. They work first. They wait second. They speak last. Not out of arrogance, out of clarity. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If your progress needs constant explanation, it isn't solid yet. Solid progress is quiet. It doesn't rush to be seen. It doesn't need interpretation. It shows up consistently and lets others connect the dots. This is where identity finally locks in. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to improve. You start seeing yourself as someone who executes. That shift is subtle, but it's permanent. Execution creates trust. With others, yes, but more importantly, with yourself. You begin to rely on your actions, not your intentions. You don't ask, will I stay consistent? You already know the answer because you've seen the evidence. That's what results really give you. Not praise, not attention, but certainty. And certainty changes behavior. You stop chasing motivation. You stop negotiating with weakness. You stop reacting to noise. Your focus stabilizes because it's no longer dependent on feeling good. It's grounded in proof. Here's the principle that completes this process. Let your work speak before you do. Not because silence is noble, but because results remove doubt more effectively than words ever could. When results speak, they don't shout, they stand. And once they do, you don't need to announce that you're winning. People can see it, but by then, winning isn't the goal anymore. Staying focused is. That's what keeps results coming. That's what keeps momentum alive. And that's what turns a phase of success into a way of life. At this point, you already know something you didn't before. Focus isn't about trying harder, it's about choosing less. Less noise, less comparison, less explanation, and more presence where your effort actually is. You've seen how comparison pulls you outward, how distraction trains your mind to avoid depth, how isolation protects direction, how private work preserves discipline, and how results eventually replace the need for validation. None of this requires dramatic change. It requires consistency, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that doesn't rush, the kind that keeps showing up even when no one is watching. This is where most people hesitate, because once you stop looking outward, there's nowhere to hide, no one else to blame, no one else to impress, just your standards. But that's also where real control begins. When your attention stays where your effort is, your days start aligning, your decisions simplify, and momentum becomes quieter but stronger. You don't need to do everything. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to watch everyone. You just need to protect one thing, your focus. If something doesn't help you build, it doesn't deserve regular access to your attention. That rule alone will quietly change how you move through life. You won't feel the shift immediately. There won't be applause, there won't be instant proof, but days will start stacking. Work will deepen, and one day, without announcement, results will show up. Not because you chase them, but because you stayed focused long enough for them to arrive. And when they do, you won't feel the need to explain your journey. You'll already know what it took. Stay quiet, stay consistent, stay focused. Until you win, thank you.